Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome, hipsters, to another exciting, eventful episode of Hips News. Today is one of those episodes that been requested and people been wanting to know about for some time now. We're going to dive into the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations. First, we're going to look into the book that was written by John Coleman. And we're going to take inserts from the audiobook as well as other interviews or segments of different TV media. And it's going to speak about this somewhat at first secret society, their implement of how the world is been molded to this day thus far. There's a lot of information, a lot of things that I think the listener should know or should at least take heed of. I'm Vessel One. With me today, as always, Vessel Two. Vessel Two, how are you today?
All is well in the kingdom, that's one. Today's show should be another interesting show. If the listening audience pays attention, this is the beginning of the nonsense. This is the beginning of where we are led off course, and it will show you who has been behind it, and it will hopefully this episode will bring you up to date to why we're in the state and the condition we're in now.
Indeed, indeed. So let us not dally. Let's get right into it.
Stay hit.
Go to a new day. I communicate. Did it. Dash.
Hold up, wait a minute.
Hidden in plain sight.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. What's in your community, locally and globally? I'm Vessel One, and with me, Vessel Two.
Hey, quick question.
Is it hidden in plain sight?
Vessel One, Vessel Two.
Talks about hidden in plain sight.
And with that, let's get into it.
Hold it now, wait. Ladies and gentlemen. Brothers and sisters. Do you know what time it is? What time is it?
It's been a long time. I was giving you time to get the last one straight.
Hidden in plain sight.
As you know, this episode is dealing with the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations, and we have a segment from this audio book of the same name, and in this audio, which should tell you basics of the origins of this madness. So let's begin.
An Audioboy 279 production. Truth audiobooks for the people. Tavistock Institute of Human Relations. Shaping the moral, spiritual, cultural, political, and economic decline of the United States of America. Forward. The Tavistock Institute of Human Relations was unknown to the people of the United States before Dr. Coleman exposed its existence in his monograph, The Tavistock Institute of Human Relations, Britain's Control of the United States. Up to that time, Tavistock had successfully retained its secretive role in shaping the affairs of the United States, its government and its people since its early beginning in London, in 1913 at Wellington House. Since Dr. Coleman's original article exposing this ultra-secret organization, others have come forward with claims of authorship, which they were unable to substantiate. Tavistock began as a propaganda-creating and disseminating organization centered at Wellington House, which was where the original organization was put together with intent of shaping a propaganda outlet that would break down the stiff public resistance being encountered to the looming war between Britain and Germany. The project was given to Lords Rothmere and Northcliffe, and their mandate was to produce an organization capable of manipulating public opinion and directing that manufactured opinion down the desired pathway to support for a declaration of war by Great Britain against Germany. Funding was provided by the British royal family, and later by the Rothschilds, to whom Lord Northcliffe was related through marriage. Arnold Toynbee was selected as Director of Future Studies. Two Americans, Walter Lippmann and Edward Bernays, were appointed to handle the manipulation of American public opinion in preparation for the entry of the United States into World War I, and to brief and direct President Woodrow Wilson. From a somewhat crude beginning at Wellington House, grew an organization that was to shape the destiny of Germany, Britain and more especially the United States in manner that became a highly sophisticated organization to manipulate and create public opinion.
That's it. And this is the beginning. What say you, Vessel 2?
Yeah, we're at the foundation, and as you can see so far, all fingers point back to the European nations. I heard Britain, I heard Germany, and we'll see what other branches of the European family jump on board. But you heard some big names, Rothschild being one of them.
Right.
It seems like this institution is it was hidden in plain sight.
Exactly. And thank goodness for John Coleman for releasing such information and bringing it to the attention of the people. But still, it wasn't really actually looked upon until giving shout out to Brother Sean Anthony, which he had first released this information on the Floor of Wisdom, and also Robert X was talking about how these things intertwine, and that was a few years ago, and so all this is really shocking, to say the least. And speaking of which, let's take a look at Sean Anthony of Floor of Wisdom as he breaks the Tavistock Institute down.
This doesn't seem to me a coincidence, considering that it states plainly that most of us are controlled by the propaganda of master criminals. It names the four at the thinking helm of the Institute, those being Lippmann, Bernays, Rothmere, and Northcliffe. It also goes into detail of how the Institute was transitioned from the Wellington House, a one-purpose creation used to weaken public resistance to Britain's looming World War I involvement, into Tavistock, the world's social engineering hub of propaganda. John Coleman's publishing company, World Intelligence Review, has the book available electronically. I'd recommend Coleman's other books, such as The Conspirators' Hierarchy, The Committee of 300, and The Rothschild Dynasty as well, end quote. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let's begin to dive into the Tavistock Institute. First, let's draw our attention to the foreword of the book. It begins by saying the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations was unknown to the people of the United States before Dr. Coleman exposed its existence in his monograph, The Tavistock Institute of Human Relations, Britain's Control of the United States. Up to that time, Tavistock had successfully retained its secretive role in shaping the affairs of the United States, its government, and its people since its early beginning in London in 1913 at Wellington House. Since Dr. Coleman's original article exposing this ultra-secret organization, others have come forward with claims of authorship, which they were unable to substantiate. Tavistock began as a propaganda-creating and disseminating organization centered at Wellington House. The original organization was put together with the intent of shaping a propaganda outlet that would break down the stiff public resistance being encountered to the looming war between Britain and Germany. The project was given to Lords Rothermere and Northcliffe, and their mandate was to produce an organization capable of manipulating public opinion and directing that manufactured opinion down the desired pathway to support for a declaration of war by Great Britain against Germany. Funding. You know how they say, follow the money, right? Follow the money. Listen to this. Funding was provided by the British royal family and later by the Rothschilds, to whom Lord Northcliffe was related through marriage. Now, I want to point out, two Americans, Walter Lippmann and Edward Bernays, were appointed to handle the manipulation of American public opinion in preparation for the entry of the United States into World War I and to brief and direct President Woodrow Wilson. Now let's pause there for a moment. Let's take a nosedive into those two Americans, Walter Lippmann and Edward Bernays. Edward Bernays, many of my Flow of Wisdom listeners are very familiar with. I've done series on Edward Bernays. So briefly, what does Wikipedia say about Edward Bernays? Edward Bernays was an Austrian-American pioneer in the field of public relations and propaganda, referred to in his obituary as the father of public relations. Bernays was named one of the 100 most influential Americans of the 20th century by Life. He's the nephew of Sigmund Freud. His basis of his study was psychology. In fact, you all are familiar with the Council on Foreign Relations, right? Well, he is the creator of it. At first, it was called the Council on Public Relations. His influence grew so much that it impacted corporations and countries and governments all over the world. Hence him creating or renaming the organization Council of Foreign Relations. His impact and influence runs very, very deep. Everything pertaining to public relations and propaganda is standing on his blueprint. Who is Walter Lippmann? Wikipedia says Walter Lippmann was an American writer, reporter, and political commentator with a career spanning 60 years. He is famous for being among the first to introduce the concept of Cold War, coining the term stereotype in the modern psychological meaning, as well as critiquing media and democracy in his newspaper column and several books, most notably his 1922 book, Public Opinion.
Yes. More information, more details about Tavistock Institute of Human Relations. Excellent book. I'm very adamant that you should pick it up if you can get a hold of it, read it, or hear it, listen through. It's an eye opener. Vessel 2, what say you?
I would just like to point out the wordplay in this episode is very tricky.
Yes.
You're going to have to kind of remind yourself that they're going to claim that these people are American, but in true essence, they're Europeans. Their roots come from Europe. So the wordplay is something you have to get your mind around. I just want everybody to remind themselves of that. But yes, Sean Anthony, shout out Sean Anthony Flow of Wisdom, always puts out good information. It's a go-to source of knowledgeable information. Flow of Wisdom, top of the list.
Excellent. Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. And we'll have links of Sean Anthony for Wisdom in the comments below. As we push on, yes, as you said, Vessel 2, you have to be leery of uh, the vocabulary that they use. And speaking of which, um, this also was from or was created and came out of the Tavistock Institute, as we will push on and we will soon see. The terms of how doublespeak became more like an everyday scenario. You hear things, this is all part of the social engineering or the brainwashing of the people and how they use certain words, certain terms, certain quote unquote, a word that I don't like to use, but it's out there, narrative. You got, as we last episode, woke is another one, collateral damage is another one. So, yes, as Vessel 2 says, please, please be leery of what's going on in the vocabulary that they use. And yes, these are Europeans that infiltrated America to control and dominate the people's ideas, thinking in relation to their benefit, where they can control and do what they would like to do. Okay, pushing on, we'll go back to Sean Ethne with more information of the Tavistock Institute.
Understand what's at stake right now and what's going on, because the fundamental research that I'm laying out on this show, you will be able to see a lot more clearly. Trust me when I tell you this. You will be able to see much more clearly what's going on right in front of our noses today. You'll be able to see the propaganda, the catchphrases, the new words, the new terminology. Before last year, we weren't using the word social distancing, were we? We weren't using words like systemic racism as fluently as we are using it today. This is why 9/11 was so successful as far as getting Americans, the mass of Americans, on board for us to go into that war, into that other country, looking for so-called weapons of mass destruction. After 9/11, breaking news became an everyday thing. Dr. Kurt Lewin is the individual that was responsible for teaching and applying the topological psychology for the Tavistock Institute. In the chapter 4, it says that topological psychology remains the most advanced method of behavior modification, which is why I would like to take a deeper dive on the topic of topological psychology and the man behind it, Dr. Kurt Lewin. I think it is relevant. Who is Kurt Lewin? So Dr. Kurt Lewin is considered by many to be the father of social psychology. He believed individuals' behaviors are determined by both someone's personality and by the social situation or environment. He was a German-American psychologist. According to Wikipedia, it says, known as one of the modern pioneers of social organizational and applied psychology in the United States. He has a theory, Lewin's theory. Lewin's theory proposes that individuals and groups of individuals are influenced by restraining forces or obstacles that counter driving forces aimed at keeping the status quo, and driving forces or positive forces for change that push in the direction that causes change to happen. I was talking about how members of the board from the Wellington House had to consult with the British royal family, and they had to obtain the approval of the Olympians. The Olympians is the inner core of the committee of 300 to formulate a strategy. The financial part, the funding was provided by the monarchy, the Rothschilds, the Milner Group, and the Rockefeller Family Trusts. Okay? So real quick. So let's take a little peek inside of Dr. John Coleman's book, The Committee of 300. Inside his book, it reads, certainly a fair number of us are aware that the people running our government are not the people who are really in control of political and economic matters, domestic and foreign. This has led many to seek the truth in the alternative press, those newsletter writers who, like me, have sought but not always found what it is that is making the United States terminally ill. Seek and ye shall find has not always been the case with this group. What we did find was that the people walk in great darkness, mostly not caring or bothering to find out where their country is headed, firm in the belief that it will always be there for them. This is the way the largest population group has been manipulated to react, and their attitude plays right into the hands of the secret government. We frequently hear about they doing this, that, or the other. They seem literally to be able to get away with murder. They increase taxes, send our sons and daughters to die in wars that do not benefit our country. They seem above our reach, out of sight, frustratingly nebulous when it comes to taking action against them. No one seems able to clearly identify who they are. It is a situation that has pertained for decades. During the course of this book, we shall identify the mysterious they, and then after that, it is up to the people to remedy their situation. On 30th April 1981, I wrote a monograph disclosing the existence of the Club of Rome, identifying it as a Committee of 300 subversive body. This was the first mention of both of these organizations in the United States. I warned readers not to be fooled by the feeling that the article was far-fetched, and I drew a parallel between my article and the warning issued by the Bavarian government when the secret plans of the Illuminati fell into its hands. We shall return to the Club of Rome and the role of the Committee of 300 in the U.S. affairs later herein.
Vessel 2, what say you?
Yeah, I think it's eh, this topic is very telling because the American public, the dominant demographic, they're comfortable, and they
Right.
do believe that the government is working for them as long as they can see that it isn't working for another group of people. As long as
Right.
that other group of people are catching the blunt end of the brutality or the ill treatment from the government, then they consider themselves to be safe.
Right.
But
Right.
with the uncovering of this institution, the Tavistock Institution, it was the
Right.
Europeans targeting the Europeans who separated themselves from Europe, living in America. So they have
Ultimately, yes.
always been the target. It's just you couldn't see it through the propaganda that was mainly
Right.
directed at everybody. But as I said before, as long as it appeared that a certain demographic of the population were subhuman, as it's been stated, then they never really worried about, or they never fathomed the thought of their government mistreating them.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Well, before we continue, not to sidetrack, but it's more of a segue. from the Tavistock Institute, what they're like you was mentioning, but just to clarify, what they were wanted to accomplish, and what spun out from these institutes were such things as eugenics, racism, sterilization, social engineering. They also was heavily into computers and AI, and they believe that ultimately, after they have a certain hold of the country or the world, then they was going to push in their quote unquote new world order, which was where we at now. A second part, which is the digital age of things, which is transhumanism, also transgender, LGBT. Where we on the verge of is um, digital currency, having AI control majority of the things that's happening in our society. I just wanted to put that out there so people can understand and see exactly what is where we at and what's going on today. As Sean Anthony was saying, he mentioned they, and uh, some of the people that or the elders or the researchers that we respect or have learned from or kind of model ourselves after were the researchers that says name the names or say who they are. And again, out of Tavistock Institute, spawn different other conglomerates of or associates, and which is the Committee of 300, the World Economic Forum, World Wildlife Foundation, the Club of Rome, NATO, and LVMH. And just quickly, before we go a little bit further, I want to play a couple of inserts of these committees as well, so you can get an understanding of how Tavistock was the root that branched, that send the branches out of these different elites or different people that decided they wanted to make this new world order. And so I'm going to play a little bit now for
The
you.
MIT researchers who developed the Doomsday Model were commissioned by an elite organization called the Club of Rome.
The Club of Rome sounds like an Illuminati group.
Oh yeah, there are plenty of fun conspiracies about these guys. The Club of Rome was created in 1968 by the Morgenthau Group during a secret meeting at Rockefeller's private estate, Bellagio.
Yeah, this sounds right.
The meeting was organized by Aurelio Pace, an Italian industrialist who had close ties to the Olivetti Corporation and Fiat. Now, Pace claimed to have solutions for world peace and prosperity, which could be accomplished through a new world order.
There it is.
The Club of Rome was established with 75 prominent industrialists, economists, and scientists from 25 nations. The Bilderberg Group and the Club of Rome are the most important foreign policy arms of the Round Table, which is led by the Committee of 300.
Whoa. Round Table? Committee of 300?
Well, the Round Table is a secret society that, if you believe the theory, is building the New World Order.
No, I believe it.
I know you do. The Committee of 300 is a council that creates policy for groups like the Club of Rome and the Trilateral Commission.
Trilateral Commission?
Yeah, it's a rabbit hole. Each of these groups deserves its own video. Back to the Club of Rome and the MIT experiment. The Club of Rome acts as a research institute on political, social, and economic issues, and supposedly NATO economic and military policy comes directly from this group. The Club of Rome claims that the future survival of mankind depends on a new global community under a single form of government.
New World Order.
Right. And the biggest threat to this New World Order and the biggest threat to mankind is overpopulation. Now, it's been alleged that the Club of Rome supports massive depopulation using any means necessary.
Any means?
Any means. In August 1980, Howard Odum, who was a member of the Club of Rome, was quoted saying, "It's necessary that the US cut its population by 2/3 within the next 50 years." Now, he failed to mention how this would be accomplished. So that's when the Club of Rome found unlikely but effective partners, 4 scientists from MIT.
You got that. Okay, we running short of time. Professor Two, any comments or statements?
Good clip. Yeah, it all there's a relationship between all of these so-called think tanks and mastermind organizations, and the Club of Rome, Committee of 300. They all have the same underlying thing, which is death and destruction.
That's right.
I saw doctors hold up the syringe and say, "You want this shot? You want this shot? Sign, sign."
You better sign those papers or your baby probably could die here.
I couldn't believe that something like this was happening in the United States.
Do you know that you've been sterilized? They have no right. That's not their decision. It's our decision.
No más bebés.
Yeah. That video, quickly, just to give some insight, that video was coming from the point of view of these women that was sterilized during the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and that was all part of the eugenics movement coming out of and from Tavistock Institute. Again, they wanted to have people that wasn't, as they say, desirable, and they wanted to get rid of and control the population. Okay, moving on.
As a new widow, Sarah Rosas Garcia was already struggling to support her 9 children when her oldest daughter was picked up by local authorities. Andrea Garcia had been accused of skipping school and being sexually promiscuous, so the authorities responsible for juvenile delinquents committed her to a state hospital. After being administered an IQ test and assigned a low score, the doctors made their verdict. They told Sarah her 19-year-old daughter would be sterilized to prevent passing on what the state saw as a mental deficiency. This horrific tale may sound like a story from an authoritarian regime, but in fact, it took place in Southern California in 1938. And Andrea Garcia was one of thousands of poor women of color targeted by the state's relentless campaign of eugenics. Since ancient Greece, there have been efforts to control human populations via reproduction, retaining some traits and removing others. But in the 19th century, the discovery of evolution and genetics inspired a new scientific movement dedicated to this endeavor. In 1883, British scientist Sir Francis Galton named this idea eugenics, drawing from the Greek word for to be well born. This wave of modern eugenicists included prominent scientists and progressive reformers who believed they could improve society by ensuring that only desirable traits were passed down. However, their definition of what traits were and were not desirable was largely determined by the prejudices of their era. Entire categories of people were considered unfit for reproduction, including immigrants, people of color, and people with disabilities. Meanwhile, their ideal genetic standard reflected the movement's members, white Europeans of Nordic or Anglo-Saxon descent. As the influence of eugenics spread in the early 20th century, many countries restricted immigration and outlawed interracial unions. These measures to improve so-called racial hygiene were taken to their horrific conclusion in Nazi Germany. The Nazi eugenics campaign systematically killed millions of Jews, as well as individuals from other groups, including Roma, gay men, and people with disabilities. Outside their extreme brutality, however, Nazi eugenic policies reflected similar standards across the globe. Throughout the mid-20th century, many countries enacted eugenics policies, and governments in Sweden, Canada, and Japan forcibly sterilized thousands of individuals. Sterilization was exceptionally common in the U.S. From 1907 to 1979, U.S. policies enforced the sterilization of over 60,000 people, with 32 states passing laws that mandated sterilization for men and women deemed mentally defective. This label was typically applied based on superficial mental health diagnoses and the results of IQ tests, which were linguistically and culturally biased against most immigrant populations. These racist standards were particularly problematic in California. From 1920 to 1945, Latina women were 59% more likely to be sterilized than other women, and the rate of sterilizations in California was incredibly high. This single state performed over 1/3 of the country's sterilization operations.
All coming from eugenics, stemming out of Tavistock Institute.
Coming from the
Yes,
minds of
Lord.
Europeans.
That's it, man. You know, and again, and we all trying to. I know this is a big, broad topic, but we're trying to narrow it down and get it finite, focused on like a laser pen, right direct. We got a couple of minutes. Other input you would like to give, Vessel Two?
Yeah, I think this Tavistock Institute, the uncovering of and the exposure of what they have started, was the right thing to do. I think Mr. Coleman did a good job writing that book, and the other books that he did write also to support his research. And it's always important, I think, to call out the name of the wrongdoers. And you might not necessarily know the names, but if you don't know the names, then the next best thing is, what is the nationality? And I think summing it up just based on nationality itself, then not all Europeans, but Europeans have a lot of answers that need to be heard coming from their institutions. Why do they feel that they can get away with this, and why are we allowing them to do so?
Agreed. And when we return, we'll have more information. We'll hear more from Floor Wisdom, Dr. Robert X, the White Files, and several other clippings that we have to bring you more detail of this Tavistock Institute. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.